First, live, local. This is Fox 12 Now.
Hello, everyone. This is Fox 12 Now. I'm Greg Nibbler. Thank you very much for joining us. We are live streaming here out of the Fox 12 Oregon newsroom, as we do every weekday, starting right at 1 o'clock, and we go throughout the afternoon. And one of the things we do get to do here is have bigger breakdowns with our reporters and our investigators, like Ezra Kaplan here joining me once again, which, Ezra, great to have you on here. It has been a very busy week.
It's been a busy couple weeks.
Busy couple weeks. It feels like months. I don't even know anymore. But yeah, certainly a lot going on. And this morning was no different. Yesterday we were talking about what was going to be coming up today. Just to kind of break that down for everybody and for everyone that's watching. Could you just give us a recap of where we're at? Leading up to what was happening this morning.
There's been a lot going on, so it's always good to step back and kind of like catch us up. So let's start from this morning. So this morning we did get we heard an appeals court heard arguments from Oregon and the federal government about whether or not the federal government can deploy federalized troops to Portland. Now, in that hearing, that was two lawyers, one representing the state of Oregon and the city of Portland, the other one representing all the defendants from the federal government, including President Trump, various departments, and various other cabinet members. Now, this panel of three judges heard these arguments over the course of about an hour and 15 minutes or so. That was much longer than they had planned on going from the beginning. They had allocated about 20 minutes per side. They went way beyond that. That wasn't on the attorney's side. That was the judges. They had a lot of questions. So for folks who got to tune in, they would have seen this, but the appeals court is different than what we might be used to seeing in court, which is that it's much more of a discussion between the judges and the attorneys rather than attorneys just presenting their case. So the judges had a lot of questions, and those questions can be revealing. The panel was made up of three judges. Two of those judges were appointed by President Trump in his first term. The third judge is actually the senior judge on the circuit, and she was appointed by President Clinton, Bill Clinton, in I want to say 98 or 99. I'll have to double check myself on that one. But the line of questioning from the two judges who were appointed by Trump did appear to be very different than the democratically appointed judge who was the senior judge. Backing up here for a second, what they were looking at was specifically this temporary restraining order that had been issued by a federal judge here in Portland over the weekend, saying you cannot take any action to deploy troops to Portland. And so that was a ruling by this local judge, by this local federal judge, and that's what the federal government is appealing. The federal government wants the ability to deploy those troops. So it's important to note that what we heard today and what the appellate court is looking into is just that order on pausing, right? It's not about the underlying case. The underlying case will continue to be heard, but on a bit of a slower, still fairly quick, but slower timeline. Okay. This is a more immediate, what they would actually call an emergency hearing to decide whether or not this needs to be changed right now. So there's a lot of legal kind of questions that play into it. We can get into a little bit more of that if you're interested in breaking it down. Yeah, I think so. I mean, and just to clarify that too for everybody, as you said, this is just on that restraining order. Right. So this is all stemming from President Trump's want to send up to 200, I think was how many? 200 National Guard members? That's right. So if we back up to September 27th, September 27th or 28th, the Trump administration issued an order federalizing Oregon National Guard members under something called Title 10, which allows the president to take control of a state's National Guard. Immediately following that, and the next day, the state and the local Portland government filed a lawsuit asking for a judge to, two things, really suing, saying, you can't do that, that's illegal, we're going to sue you over it, and judge, can you put a pause on what the government's doing while we figure this out in court? So those are kind of the two things. One is the core question, is that they are alleging that this is illegal, and the other is an interim action. Just stop. Yeah, so in the federal court system, there is generally a deference or they tend to lean towards a status quo. So the courts will generally leave things as they are while they figure out questions, unless either of the side can demonstrate what we call irreparable harm, whether they can show that by leaving the status quo, something bad is going to happen and not necessarily be able to be fixed. And so that's a lot of what was being discussed today and that has been discussed throughout this case as it's moved from court to court, is whether or not allowing these troops to be deployed would cause irreparable harm. The state and city argue that it would, and the federal government argues that the irreparable harm is actually not being able to deploy those troops, and in that case, they would then be harmed. So that's a little bit of what brings us to today.
Where we're at right now. And so for this temporary restraining order, which well, by the way, so we don't have a ruling, right?
We do not have a ruling. Let's make that really clear. So the judges heard about an hour and 15 minutes of arguments and then said we will take it under advisement, which means that there is no decision issued from what we call the bench or verbally. Instead, they will at some point post a decision, a written decision, to the court filings. We don't know when that's going to be. The court has said that they're going to move as swiftly as possible. I think most folks who are court watching around this would expect a couple days. It could be, I would guess, as soon as later today or tomorrow. It also could take probably up to a week. I would say in the coming days to keep it vague, because we really don't know.
Yeah, that's completely up to the judges, right?
Yes.
Their discretion on their decision on that. So obviously we'll bring you that info as soon as we have it. Going to the restraining order itself now, is there a time limit on that restraining order that we're also approaching?
Absolutely. So there's actually 2 restraining orders that are in play here. Only one of them is being challenged in the appellate court. So there's one temporary restraining order barring Oregon National Guard from being deployed to Portland. There's a second one that came on Sunday barring any National Guard from being deployed to Oregon. Now, both of those are 14-day restraining orders, and they will expire on their own after 14 days. So we're, just to do the math, about a week from Saturday is when the first one, the one that's being considered right now, is set to expire. 2 things on that. One, there is already a hearing scheduled for right before that, late next week, to discuss possibly extending that temporary restraining order. So there's a possibility of extending it before it were to expire. And then also, these judges did seem interested in ruling before that came to be. I don't anticipate them waiting or taking no action, because they did discuss in the hearing what would happen if we just did nothing. And in that case, the TRO, the temporary restraining order, would expire unless it was extended by the judge. It's a lot of variables. The judges generally want to make a clear decision so that the case underlying can move forward and progress.
Gotcha. Yeah, so this is the kind of the first thing that's got to be decided then?
Yeah. And now, granted, these things are going to start moving in parallel, right? So as this temporary restraining order is being discussed, as we wait for a hearing or a decision from the appellate judges and potentially any other, it could be elevated or they could ask to elevate it to the Supreme Court. That can all move along in one path. That is separate from the core case, which will continue along its path through the district court here in Portland. And so that will continue moving forward. And it is important to note that regardless of what happens, what's ruled on the temporary restraining order, that is separate from the core lawsuit here, and doesn't mean whether it's granted or not. It doesn't really necessarily mean anything about the outcome of the core lawsuit.
Gotcha. So it's complicated.
It is very complicated.
There's a lot of facets to this, and that's why we're trying to boil it down here for you as well. I keep using that term, but I mean, really, there's just so much.
There's a lot.
There's so much associated with this to understand there. So, as we stand right now, just to kind of recap this, so the hearing was this morning. We don't have a ruling from the judges yet.
Correct.
We can't say when that's going to be, but I think it would probably be safe to say before this restraining order runs out.
I think that's
would be a safe bet.
A fair prediction.
Yeah.
Don't hold me to it.
Right.
We can't predict what the court's going to do.
Exactly. So as of right now, that's where we're at on this.
Yeah.
And any other particular court hearings going on or things that we should know about in association with this?
Well, there is a kind of, again, in parallel, this was all happening today in, well, technically it was remote based out of San Francisco, but in the Portland case, we had an appeals hearing today. There was a separate hearing at the district level in Illinois today dealing with the deployment of troops to the state there. I haven't been keeping up with that, but it's interesting because these are there's a lot of parallels, there's a lot of similarities between the two cases. One of the, I think, more interesting ones is that, in fact, the attorney who's arguing for the federal government, the attorney who represented the federal government in this lawsuit here in Portland last week is now currently in Chicago arguing for the federal government in that case.
Interesting.
And so it's the same attorney, two different states, two different cases, but fairly similar case law that is being discussed.
Wow.
So, and then the other thing to just keep track of is that this is something that can continue to elevate, right? This can be petitioned by either side to move to the Supreme Court. That being said, the Supreme Court is very, very picky on what they will entertain or what they will hear. So that's going to be another question that we'll be looking at once this does happen.
Depending on whatever that ruling is, yeah, so the other side could keep escalating
so
it. And
by no means
bring it up,
necessarily the end. We have many, many more steps before any actual final resolution, I think.
A lot of complications go with that, but I mean, certainly, huge implications no matter what happens with this. And Ezra, I know you were watching this whole thing this morning, so I thank you for going through that, because for a lot of us, that's a lot to interpret what's going on there when it comes to the legal side of things. And you breaking it down for us really helps out quite a bit.
Yeah, no problem.
And we've got this at KPTV.com too. And as we mentioned, we don't know when that ruling could come in. It could be an hour from now, it could be a week from now, it could be, we don't know. But when it does happen, we will have that info for you. And so I always recommend downloading the Fox 12 Oregon app, because that way we can push out our notifications and be like, hey, here's the news.
The second we know, we'll let you know.
The second we know, we'll be right here bringing that to you as quick as possible. So we thank everybody for joining us. So this is Fox 12 Now. I just want to remind you of that too. We live stream here every weekday. We start at 1, go throughout the afternoon. There's plenty of other topics we're going to be discussing here today, different segments, different interviews we're going to be having. But if there's breaking news, we will be here for you with that. And Ezra, thank you.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it. And for everybody watching, we're going to take a break for right now. We'll be back at 1:30. I'll talk to you then. I'm Greg Nibbler. This is Fox 12 Now.